Hey everyone, welcome to the EsportsNext podcast. I am thrilled to be joining as the host for season 3 along with my co-hosts. We are going to be interviewing speakers, sponsors, and attendees of the Esports Trade Association conference in Chicago. So if you're looking to understand who will be at the conference and what they're all about, tune in, come join us. All right, welcome to another episode of the EsportsNext podcast. It is my pleasure to be joined by my two lovely co-hosts. We have the founder of the Esports Trade Association, Miss Megan Van Petten, and of course we have Lindsay, the Boss Poss, joining as well. And today the three of us have the privilege of being joined by our lovely guest, Melissa Burns, who is the founder and CEO of Esports Canada. Welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So for our audience to best understand who you are and what you do, why don't we kick off with what is Esports Canada and what is your mission?
So eSport Canada is a national not-for-profit, federally registered, and we work with folks from different aspects of the ecosystem working to unify, amplify, and advocate for esports in Canada. So we range from 3 different main divisions that we operate in: the education space, which is specifically K-12 school programs. We have our post-secondary, which is all the colleges and universities in Canada, and then we have our competitive division, which ranges from everything that you can imagine, from recreational all the way up to our pro teams and players. And so we know that there's lots of great stuff already happening. And so our mission is really just to bring everybody together so that we can work together collectively to highlight the strengths that are already happening, use that as leverage in other spaces, and advocate for a better space for all.
That's awesome. That is a lot to put your arms around from the standpoint of your focus. Like I mean that only complimentarily, that you're doing so much in this space. I do know that you are an organization founded by educators. Can you share with us, what was this journey like, or what was that moment when you said, I want to found an esports organization to really help in all these different areas?
Yeah, for sure. So it was kind of a strange way that I ended up where I did. And I have to say right off the hop that while we do have a lot of things that we're working on, I am by no means doing it alone, and in no way would be able to do it alone. I have a really incredible group of folks that I surround myself with, from our board of directors to our executive team, who really work to make this whole thing happen. And of course, huge shout out to all of our national councils, which I can talk about a little bit later as well, that really are the heart and soul behind what it is we do. But I have been a gamer my whole life. I love gaming, and League of Legends is my title of choice. And so I know that the stereotype of educators playing League of Legends is that we're all support. I actually break the mold. I'm a mid laner.
Nice.
And I'm a diehard Ziggs main, regardless of whether he's meta or not. I do occasionally play sup, but I mean, it really has to be the right composition for that to happen. But I started an esports program during a career change for myself. So I had actually been working in musical theater professionally. And when I found myself transitioning out of that to be with someone I love rather than doing something I loved, I found myself working in education. And I felt like a bit of a fish out of water. I was trained to do it. I love people. I love working in education. But it was a pretty severe shift from living in a different city every 5 nights to now being in the classroom full time. And so I wanted to have something that felt like I could connect with my students, because in education, relationships are everything. And really, that is the foundation of any good learning environment, even in a professional space, is having a good relationship with the people that you're working with. And so back in 2016, went to my brand new principal. I'd only been there for 2 weeks, and said, hey, can I start a middle years esports program? And my principal was like, I have no idea what that is, but if you can find the gear, go for it. And to shorten a very long story, that program turned into a provincial program, which turned into a national education program that really started to take off around 2019 and then was firmly established in January of 2020. And we had already like trademarked and registered federally and everything prior to the pandemic. And it became a safe haven for a lot of folks during the pandemic, because while school programs were all being shifted to being online and all those extracurriculars that they used to do in school were no longer available, there was now this opportunity to connect and build those relationships with those students in a way that was meaningful for them and that they could do safely. And that's really where we started to grow and develop. And it was about building capacity amongst educators, collectively creating resources together. We also saw the need for this become very strong during the pandemic as a lot of venture capitalists came into the Canadian education space. And not to say there's anything wrong with that, but in an education space in Canada, at least, we wanted to have an option for folks that was values driven rather than bottom line driven. And so that's really where we felt that we were trying to fill a need, and we were able to do so with the folks around us. Fast forward a little bit later, and just about a little over a year and a half ago, we were approached by a couple different levels of government and some folks from the industry who had noticed our work and wanted to be able to host large international competitions in Canada and also have Canadians compete internationally. To do that, you have to be attached to a Canadian federally registered not-for-profit, and we already were, and we had a good name. So they asked if we would expand our operations into that space, and after a lot of deliberation, we agreed. But before any of that was released publicly, we were independently contacted by a bunch of the colleges and universities about a month after those initial conversations happened, and they wanted to do the same. So then it became this thing where now all of a sudden we were operating in 3 major spaces, and we're able to go through the growth and process of re-identifying what is our purpose, what is our vision and mission in this space, and how can we use our strengths from where we started to really effectively work in a number of different areas and avenues across the Canadian landscape. And here we are.
That's amazing. And I love that you were able to incorporate so many different levels of education and bring in so many different people from different fields to like help bring that vision together. Can you tell me a little bit about where you started with Esport Canada and how you were able to decide when and how to kind of add team members or add areas of focus or whatever it might be? I know like education was the initial point and now it's kind of grown out into a lot of different areas. So how did you decide, you know, when to add people and when to add subject areas or different programs and things? Like, what was your growth strategy?
Yeah, so I think the board of directors grew naturally as we started to expand into those different areas. And so that was kind of a no-brainer, and that really just lended itself to the growth of the organization as a whole. Once we started to see that this was much bigger than what we could handle just within a board of directors, then all of a sudden it needed to expand into, well, who's going to be on our executive team? What does that look like? And how are we going to operate in that space? And I do have to say that something that I always look for, I heard this quote once where they said, hire people you would want to work for. And I think that that's a really cool way of framing it, because then you know that you're working with people that you feel comfortable with, that you have a relationship with, and that you know that you would want to have them in a position of authority as well. So that's definitely been something that I've considered. I've been really fortunate that all of these awesome people have kind of come to us. It's been really, really fortunate that we've had the interest of so many incredibly talented people. And something that is definitely a testament to the work that we're doing right now is that while we are currently in the process of looking for sustainable funding models, we are currently operating on a board and executive that is completely pro bono. The people that are working with us really believe in what we're doing, and they can see the value in what we're doing and are willing to put their efforts and their passions and their talents behind it. And so some of the areas that we were able to expand into this past year is we were able to add in a legal team with our chief legal officer, Amar Sidhu from Amar VR Law. We have the incredibly talented Kendrick Slinscott, who's working with us as our Chief Marketing Officer. Very incredible. If you ever get the chance to work with them, I highly recommend it. Like,
That's like my best friends. Yeah, I love them.
Chef kiss. Seriously, the best. Cannot rave enough. We've got strategic partnerships with CK Dollywall. We've got one of our new expanding areas that is going to be seeing a lot of TLC this coming year is going to be in the area of building rules, regulations, reffing, coaching, all those things that kind of become really essential to the structure and longevity of the programs that you run. But often get like forgotten about a little bit at the beginning when you're just kind of like, let's see what goes and throw the spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks. So we're really, really fortunate to be working with Landon Gorbenko, who is actually doing his PhD right now in esports mental performance, and works with Shopify Rebellion, and absolutely incredible person all around. The whole team is outstanding. So I'm really, really fortunate to be working with all of them. And then we've got a bunch of team members that are working even within each of those divisions too.
A lot of familiar names, mostly members already. We would love to, with every chapter or member or partner, we always love to see how we can help. And you talked about, building value first before the bottom line, and now the challenge of sustainable funding models. What should we, all of our listeners, know about Canada, and how can US headquarters help?
I think that we have a lot of really incredible talent here in Canada. One of the struggles that we're finding at the moment is that while we have really, really high-end talent, like Twist comes to mind as being a really outstanding individual player, is that we often have to ship them out to other places for them to compete. And so something that we're looking to do as we build these different spaces is not just looking for opportunities for talent to be developed in Canada, but also for talent to be able to stay in Canada and to be able to play here on home ground. And not that that's the only way that they can do it, but just looking for more ways to do that. And so I think that some of the relationships we've been able to build with some of our American counterparts and starting to explore opportunities for different exhibitions and show matches and those kinds of things help to build a really healthy competition between the two nations. And so thinking about like our early conversations now with the USCF and looking at what that relationship can look like. And so where those business partners come into play is really looking at, publishers reign king when it comes to esports. So definitely anytime that there's an opportunity to have conversations with publishers, whether it's in the school space, the collegiate space, the competitive space, those relationships are really, really paramount to success. But then as we start to expand into these exhibition matches and different show matches that are important not only for building the brand of both of these different organizations in the competitive space, it's also really part of building your fan base as well, so that when we send competitors off to those international spaces, that they have people who have been watching them and following them, and they have that fan base to actually cheer them on when they're competing internationally. And that's huge. And that's that connection that I like to talk about between grassroots being really important for the pro leagues. But definitely looking for those opportunities where we can partner with businesses and different companies, especially through the ESTA, where they can now be sponsors and partners in those exhibition matches and in those show matches, knowing that it's an investment up front, but that the plan long term is to really build an ecosystem that kind of parallels what we see in the traditional sports arenas. And the proximity between our borders really allows for that to happen on a very regular and ongoing basis. So I think that that's a great opportunity to explore.
I love hearing all the detail and experience and just the knowledge that you have about this whole space. It's really impressive. What I'd love to learn from you a little bit, Melissa, is a little bit more about the Canadian esports ecosystem. I think a lot of our members are based in the United States. We have a number of members who are based in Canada as well. Sometimes when we're so close, right? And we're very similar as well with the same language, and a number of, cultural norms are similar, a number are different. I'd love to understand, I heard you're federally recognized, right?
Well, we're federally registered. They are
Registered,
aware of us.
registered.
There's a difference.
Terminology is important. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. There's obviously there's a number of professional orgs across the country. There's famous streamers that that come from Canada. Can you just give us an inside look at what is the Canadian esports market like? And I also understand, it may be different, on one side of the country versus the other. So is wherever you'd like to take that.
Yeah, I think that there are definitely, as I had alluded to before, there are pockets of success happening all across the country. But because we have a much smaller population than the United States, sometimes you kind of we get lost in translation when it comes to really getting the attention that it deserves and the amount of pull that it gets. Some of our major hubs here in Canada, Montreal has been established for forever, and a lot of our major game developers are in Montreal. And I think that space is often forgotten when it comes to talking about esports in Canada. It's like you usually hear about Toronto being the big hub, and then you hear about game developers in Vancouver. But we forget that Montreal's been around for a very, very, very long time in the game space, both competitively and in game dev. And so they're a huge player when it comes to esports. So I'd say those are three major hubs. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening with new interest from economic development and also from tourism departments in Alberta, notably from Edmonton and Calgary have been putting a lot of time and effort into it. Especially they recently released the Alberta esports strategy. So that's a provincial strategy that was established prior to the pandemic. Vancouver had made their esports strategy that they are now in the process of kind of reviving and revisiting now that they are able to reallocate some of those resources to that space again. Toronto is working with a consortium that is really looking to really put some wheels behind what some people have quoted. This is not my words. I'll put it in. Someone else said this. The Wild West of esports is Ontario, where there's tons of stuff happening and everybody's got their stake in it. But it's fairly every man for himself at the moment. And so definitely looking at bringing a little bit more cohesion to that space. Manitoba as well is starting to explore the space and looking at retrofitting for different aspects. But something that we've seen is that there are lots of really healthy pockets of community gaming where you have, especially with like the FGCs and the Smash clubs happening all across the country. And it's really incredible to see how that space has developed and kind of kept a lot of its authenticity. While a lot of the other spaces have kind of shifted and evolved, those spaces, like what you would expect, is kind of what you get. And it's really neat to see how that real gamer ownership is still present in those spaces. And so I think that we've definitely seen a number of strategies starting to be either explored or implemented across the country. We're seeing more development studios are definitely looking at the space, not even just the independent ones, but a lot of the major ones are now starting to look at it because of the economic advantage that it gives them, because there are a lot of tax breaks that are available for developers that choose to come to Canada. But there's also just like the cost of operations in Canada being very competitive, and depending on which space you're working in, like Ubisoft just opened up a headquarter in Winnipeg, which is very close to where I live, and that was definitely a strategic move in my opinion, based on just looking at the actual cost effectiveness of it. Because while you're not in that big hub like you would be in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, you're really getting a big bang for your buck in terms of what you're able to do in that space, and you're one flight away from anything else.
Yeah, that was a great move. And it's nice to see companies coming in to that space.
Yeah.
So the economic development of Winnipeg and et cetera can see this and see these companies and see the growth for the industry and what esports, stands for. So that's such a win. We were just discussing that right before you got on the call.
Yeah.
Austin, are you gonna chime in there?
Yeah, I wanted to, this has been an amazing overview of all the different things that are happening across the country in Canada, and especially in Winnipeg, which, by the way, is very close to some of my very good friends who live in North Dakota. So I am intimately familiar with the city of Winnipeg.
There you go.
Yeah. So very close to North Dakota and Minnesota up there. But I wanted to take a chance too to talk to you about you're coming to EsportsNext and participating, which I am so excited for. Hopefully everyone knows by now, like, you're an awesome speaker, awesome person to have around, and just a wealth of knowledge on esports and building it out and community and all that good stuff. So I would love for you just to tell everyone what you're doing at EsportsNext and what you're looking forward to about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was honored when they had asked me, you folks asked me to come be part of the event to speak about esports and education. That is definitely a big part of the work that I started with, obviously, but continue to do today. And I think, honestly, I'm more excited to even just be there and meet. Like, I've seen the list of the folks that are going to be there. I'm like, oh, meeting all these people for the first time in real life is just so exciting to me, because I've been following some of these people for years at this point. And so to have the opportunity to actually like sit down with them and pick their brain in person is like, it's great to be able to do it on like a Zoom call, but like to actually be there. And I know that we had just been part of, like, ESTA had a presence at the Esports Travel Summit last week in Toronto. And already from that experience, having that opportunity to actually meet with people in person is just next level. And like, not to throw a pun into things with EsportsNext. Great branding, by the way.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Right. It really is an incredible opportunity where you get to come together and really just not only just get ideas, but also to leave feeling very refreshed and re-energized. I know that sometimes we get so locked into just like the monotony of getting things done. And having come from a performance background, they always say, you have to hear 100 no's before you hear your one yes. And that's a very common thing. But sometimes it helps to be around other people who are still experiencing some of those no's, and also to celebrate those yeses. And I think that this is a really great place where you can build that network and strengthen your network and really pick up some really great ideas, because you never know what someone's going to say that'll be like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And then you flip it and do something really incredible with it. And that's really what these kinds of spaces are about.
Yeah, you make such a good point of the value of in-person connection, right? I remember a couple of years ago, our first in-person conference was the first industry event to come back from COVID. And so there was such a halo effect around the whole event, because we had all, been at home by ourselves for a couple of years. And it was either, wow, I haven't seen my friend in 2 years, or I've been seeing you on Zoom for 2 years, but have never met in person. And I never realized until then quite exactly how beneficial it is to be together in person. Even like, I never took a video call in my life before COVID, now I'm on 10 Zooms a day, but it's shocking how even as much as we see each other's faces on a screen, the opportunity to shake a hand or give a hug or have a drink in person or experience, a home run from the Wrigley rooftops, there's nothing like it. And it just so helps to develop relationships. And relationships is what business is all about. People hire their friends. They go to vendors who they trust and know for specific things. For those who are listening, Melissa, who are the types of people who you are looking forward to most to meeting and are most strategically, I guess you could say, beneficial to Esports Canada?
Yeah, I think, selfishly, I'm really excited to meet Steve Isaacs in person.
He's great. You should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome.
I'm super excited for that one. And I know it's probably just like the millennial in me that's like, oh my gosh, you're exactly what I thought you were going to be. Because, like, to me, it's just like I've had all kinds of conversations with folks online, and I don't know why I think it's going to be different in person. And then they're exactly who they are online as they are in person. And that's always exciting to me. So, really, I'm excited to meet anyone and everyone at this point. My books are wide open. I am open to all conversations and ready to shake some hands and meet some people and really see where this goes, because realistically within the Canadian landscape, we have so many different opportunities available to folks, both to get involved and also for us to be able to share what we've been doing strategically. I also think, from what I understand, that there are going to be a number of publishers that are maybe going to be present. So that's really exciting. That's an opportunity I will not be passing up. So definitely.
They're not from Montreal, but
no.
they will be. Megan?
No, that's funny. Steve does not disappoint.
Unsurprising.
He's such a great guy. I hope he brings shirts. I have a couple of Unreal Engine shirts that are so cool. And when I wear them, people are like, I wonder who she is. Like, where did you get that shirt? And you hear people like waitresses have come up to me and they're like, where did you get your shirt?
When you meet
You're
Steve,
like, I worked on The Mandalorian.
Melissa, when you meet Steve, and for our audience who is not aware, Steve is with Epic Games, who is obviously the publisher of Fortnite, and they've acquired Psyonix, which publishes Rocket League as well. So Melissa, you need to challenge Steve in a game of foosball.
So I've heard.
But you're gonna have to get in line after MVP, because apparently they've got a rematch.
We have a really okay. So I am not good at video games. Never have been. I have like 2 left hands, but I'm like undefeated at foosball. Because when I was growing up, foosball was in the center and the games were all around.
Mm-hmm.
So I just won at foosball always. But there was something wrong with the foosball machine when I was playing Steve. For well, I'm not kidding.
I love that. Blame the machines.
I am. Right? So I like the machines where you can turn the guys up and it will stay. You know, like you put it up or you put it down.
Oh, yeah.
Mine were just spinning. Like I couldn't place my guys properly. Therefore, Steve had the home team advantage. I had 2 shoutcasters, which were two ladies. The crowd around us, and we played twice. Plus, you're just laughing so hard.
This is amazing.
I rematched him and lost twice. So I'm blaming the equipment.
Of course.
I'm not Paz, have you ever heard me competitive about anything ever? I'm not a competitive.
Actually, no. Like this has been a fun story to hear.
I've only won at one thing my whole life physically, and that's foosball. And then the other thing I'm good at is a board game. So it's like limited to 2 things. And I am ashamed to say that they have to get those foosballs machines fixed over at the Arlington Stadium for me to go back.
Well, we'll see. I'll challenge him to some foosball, but then he better be ready for some hockey afterwards. So that's all I can say. Bring the Canadian.
Yeah.
I like that attitude.
That's cool. And oh my gosh, the Canadian Hall of Fame. We had such a good time. We got pictures with the original Stanley Cup in Canada.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it was cool.
Did you eat cereal out of it? I hear that's the thing to do. Or maybe that's just if you win it, when all the players.
We are not privy to the cereal eating portion of the
you have to
Cup.
earn that.
Yeah, I didn't do anything for that.
Melissa, to take this back to you and Esports Canada for just a minute, away from the football table. Can you tell us a little bit about how Esports Canada is focused on supporting women in esports and gaming?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that we do that's a little bit different than many of the other approaches that I've seen is that it's not specifically women. We're looking at supporting marginalized folks in general. And so I know that there's definitely a lot of really important work being done to support women in gaming. And we know that there's lots of data to support the need for it. Like when we see that like half of all gamers are female, but only like 5% are in the pro leagues. You know that they're not developing to the highest ability for a reason. And having been in the education space, I've seen how that translates. And spend 5 minutes in middle school classroom, and you'll know what I mean. And so we definitely want to make sure that we are having those conversations, but that it's not focused specifically on women in gaming. It's about people in gaming and making sure that we're making intentional space for marginalized genders and marginalized folks in our LGBTQ2S plus communities, and making sure that they have that safe space. And so one of the things that we're doing really, really intentionally is we're working in education, because we know that the space for adults, we can do what we can to try and create more opportunities, to try and really elevate the space as best we can. But really, the real change happens in education. It starts by bringing it into classrooms and not even just having that conversation with the kids that are signing up to be on a competitive team. We need to be having those conversations with all of our kids, because we are seeing a huge paradigm shift right now where Gen Z is reporting just as many real life experiences in online spaces as they are in physical spaces. And so reality to them is in those digital spaces too, which myself as an elder millennial, I kind of get it, but I know that I don't get it to the same extent as my students. And so for them, we need to make sure that we're having those conversations where we are helping them to identify problematic language, that we're helping them develop their self-regulation, that we're helping them develop their social emotional skills so that they know how to interact with other people in constructive ways. And essentially, it's this concept of kind of playing street ball versus basketball, where if our kids are only playing street ball, it's a very different sport. But as soon as you introduce it to a school program and you start to give them a framework and you start to give them a structure and you show them this is what the game could be, then all of a sudden you start to win over more and more and more. And it doesn't mean that street ball ceases to exist. It's still there, but it's still going to have some of that influence. And so that's really what we want to do, is we want to start building capacity amongst educators to bring this into our curriculum, not just as an extracurricular, but into the curriculum itself. And so something that we've been able to do and start to have conversations around is actually looking at connecting with departments of education and faculties of education, like the teachers' colleges across the country. And right now we're doing a bunch of pilot projects in a number of schools that are specifically looking at collecting data around these areas. And we're trying to run our esports programs starting all the way in elementary school, not necessarily in competition with other people online, but looking at it as a parallel to phys ed, where in early years phys ed, you're developing gross motor skills, fine motor skills, some of those like basics, so that when they get into middle school, now they're starting to explore competition. And then in high school, they're really honing their skills in an activity that they love, so that they can continue living an active lifestyle after high school. And we want to do that with digital spaces for our students, where they learn basic digital skills in those early years, start to explore competition and different ways of interacting online in middle school, and then really refining their skills in their area of interest, whether that's shoutcasting, media creation, content, like all those different areas, so that they can continue contributing to digital media in constructive ways after high school. And so in order to do this, we are doing it in collaboration with these different facets of our education system, which, similar to the US, is provincially mandated, just like it's state mandated in the US. And we are hoping that in a few years from now, we're fingers crossed, in 3 years, we will be starting the creation of a pan-Canadian esports curriculum framework. We have one just like that for science already, and we are hoping to now introduce one specifically for esports. So that is on the docket for a couple of years from now. Ambitious, perhaps, but you know what? I'm shooting for the stars on this one.
Wow. That's incredible. I love how esports is becoming more and more integrated into the classrooms. We had another guest who's was actually spoke at this high school a while back, and these kids, they're 15, 16 years old, and their project was to develop an idea, basically an esports team, and pitch it to an investor, which I was the investor. And I was just thinking, the education I had when I was in high school had nothing to do with what I was interested in, nor did I have any idea at all about anything with accelerators or startups or investments, probably until I was 30. And I was just thinking, what
So
did it?
last year.
That's right. Yeah, about 10 years ago. But it's just so incredible and so valuable that kids are learning things that are so relevant, not only to their passions, but what they can do for a living. My last question for you, Melissa, would be with regard to educational esports, what is something that you see can be improved or changed or added to that is not currently really there, but you're looking forward to the space growing to that area?
I think when I think about those competitive spaces specifically, I find that often educators are kind of in a like a cross between either I'm running like club-based, like casual drop-ins, or I have a really highly competitive team. And I've noticed that there's a very big difference in terms of which students show up for each of those different spaces. And I think that as we start to explore more opportunities for them to either coexist within a school or to have options for both, is really going to have a really positive impact on both spaces, because you're going to see more professionalism come into the casual spaces, and you're going to see more inclusion come into the competitive spaces. And I think that one of the barriers, that perceived barriers from my side of the border, has just been capacity amongst educators, where generally speaking in a school, you'll find like usually one teacher that's willing to do this. Something that's different from Canada and the US is that teachers in Canada don't get a stipend to do extracurricular work. So if they're doing extracurricular work, it is literally just volunteer. They don't get anything for it. There's no incentivizing participation in extracurriculars. So you really are looking for that teacher that's really, really wanting to be there and sees the value in offering something like that for their students. So most schools for a very long time, there's really only been one person. And so that's where we get into that space of it's one or the other, because they just don't have the time and space and bandwidth to do both. Yeah. But I think now that as we're starting to grow these programs and we're starting to see more involvement, and we're able to have those sort of mentor relationships in place for them, so that new folks can feel comfortable and confident coming into those spaces, even though they may not necessarily have those foundational skills that they think they need to be successful, even though they already have everything they need, that now we're going to have the opportunity for those programs to grow. And even something as simple as we've run into where like there's that one coach and they have teams that want to compete in 5 different titles. Well, normally you would coach one season of one sport, like you would be the basketball coach, or maybe you would do basketball and like cross country because it's a shorter season. It's Canada. We only run for like a month. And so like, we run into those kinds of situations where like the expectation is just so different from the reality. And so now as we start to have more teachers that are able to do that, and we're able to now better equip them, I think we're going to see that shift.
Love that. Thank you for breaking that down. Thank you for sharing everything that you are doing up north. And we just can't wait to have you in person at the event in Chicago and introduce you to, all of our members and vice versa. For those who are listening and are looking to connect with you before the conference, what are the ways to connect and follow Esports Canada, and then you personally, if you'd like them to?
Yeah, of course. So you can find us on all of the major social media apps. For the most part, it's esport without the S at the end, just esport _Canada. So you'll be able to find us there, including Threads. We haven't posted anything yet, but we've got the account. So yay. And then for me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I don't know how much longer I'll be around on Twitter, but I'm there. So definitely look me up, Melissa Burns, or on Twitter, Melissa Burns EDU.
Wonderful. Appreciate that. I encourage everybody who's listening to connect with Melissa. As you've heard, she definitely knows exactly what her and her organization are doing with esports in Canada. And you're just such a wonderful addition to the ESTA family. And I look forward to you sharing your insights and your experience at our conference. On behalf of Megan and Lindsay, thank you, Melissa, once again for joining us today on the EsportsNext podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait to be there.